everyone, it's Ben. It's good to see you. It's been a little while since I've been on the YouTube. As you can see here, I'm in a crappy one-bedroom apartment, but in the beautiful city of Atlanta. Took a new job recently that's requiring me to relocate across the country, so I'm sort of in this weird transition state and just not able to get on and race, much less stream, nearly as much as I used to. But exciting things happened recently. iRacing had a really cool, feature-rich update going into December of 2019 that included a new way of painting cars called Spec Maps, and they had put out a tutorial that I think missed part of the community pretty importantly, and that's to say that a lot of the community does not have Photoshop. They use the alternatives out there. Most prominent among them, Gimp. I myself am a Gimp user. I've done a lot of paints on Gimp, a whole lot of paints on Gimp, many of which I'm very, very happy with, some of which I'm not, but I've learned throughout all that time, bit by bit, sort of self-teaching how to do better and better work. And I've actually learned a bunch of tricks since the last time I did a tutorial, and it might be time for me to do another one. Now, what am I doing today? I want to be clear, today I'm going to show you how Spec Maps work in Gimp. What I'm not going to do is a full painting tutorial. We are not going to go from a blank slate to a final paint job. What I want to do is present a couple of scenarios that explain how and why Spec Maps work the way they do. That's where I think iRacing kind of missed the ball a little bit there, was that they presented a how-to without any of the underlying foundations as to what these things are doing and why they're doing them. Now, that said, my understanding is a week-old, self-taught understanding. I'm sure there are graphic designers out there who will watch this and say, Ben, you just don't get it, and that's okay. I get it enough to be able to understand it, and I feel like now to understand it well enough to teach you. So sit back and relax. I'm gonna change here so you're not looking at my ugly mug, and show you the car that I sort of flexed these muscles on. I had painted this car differently. I had done a yellow and blue. Anything you see right now that's silver on that car was yellow. And I decided to use this as a base to make sort of a satin finished silver car instead of the yellow and blue Pete Buttigieg car that I was using. And so a lot of experimentation went into that, a lot of just sort of figuring it out and playing around, and I want to sort of re-step through some of those steps to show you how we came up to this finished product. Alright, now to start, I want to start in a weird place here. We're not going to start in Gimp, we're going to start in PowerPoint. So I'm going to go down here to PowerPoint and pull up this just blank slide, because I want to take just a second and talk about layers as a foundational understanding. If you're watching this, you probably already have some experience with Gimp, but if this is your first time ever messing with any kind of image manipulation in this manner, a foundational understanding of layers is going to be really, really important. And this is just an easy tool to be able to explain it. Now, on top of that, I think that there's an extra understanding of layers where Spec Maps are concerned that go beyond the normal. So if you feel like you've got a good grasp on layers in general in editing, but don't necessarily haven't figured out your Spec Map stuff yet, then this might be worth watching. I'm just gonna create a basic scenario here, right? As a designer, I want to create a yellow diamond, okay? Now, so I've got this thing, and that's yellow, it's the right color. Think of this as the base layer of the car, right? This is your main color. But what I wanted was a diamond, right? And so I'm now going to take another shape and throw it on top here, right? And now I've got a blue. So I want a yellow diamond, let's extend that. I want a yellow diamond on a blue background, right? So I'm gonna go into my format options here, and I'm gonna rotate this bad boy. So I think it's, there we go. So I'm gonna rotate this 45 degrees. And I'm manipulating something on top of the yellow. So it's important to point out that because of the way I brought these in, the blue layer is on top of. It's moving around on top of the yellow layer, right? Again, very foundational understanding of layers. If this was a keyboard sitting on a desk and I dropped a newspaper on top of that keyboard, the newspaper will obscure the keyboard, right? Okay, so let's make a diamond. I'm going to take this and throw it over there. I'm going to throw this down there and just sort of roughly align them. Take another one down there, and then another one up there. And I have roughly made a diamond, right? I now have a yellow diamond on a blue background. But in reality, what I have is a negative space in a blue foreground, right? I've got an area of yellow. That area happens to be in the shape of a diamond that I have not covered up with blue. So the yellow is showing through. Now, if I rearrange my layers, if I take this blue and I send it down a level, right? That was the last one I did, right? But see what's happening now? This one is overlapping. This one's overlapping this one. See that how there's, you know, like, again, poker cards on the table, right? Some overlapping the others. If I send all the way to the back, now this one is behind the keyboard, right? Behind the yellow. I no longer have a diamond because I've reordered my layers. Now, if I take another layer and cover my diamond, let's send this one all the way forward again. Send to front, and then I want to send it back just a little bit so that I'm not obscuring. There we go. So I've got my diamond back, right? Now let's take this one and make it somewhat opaque. So I still have a yellow diamond, but it's either more bluish or more yellowish depending on how transparent this layer is. Think of this like sunglasses. If I put sunglasses on and look at a newspaper, which has a magnifying glass on top of it, which is sitting on top of a keyboard on a desk, I'm seeing multiple layers of distortion, right? The keyboard is obstructed by the newspaper. The newspaper is partially magnified by the magnifying glass, and my sunglasses are another layer over my eyes, right, in between me and the subject, that is changing the overall color of everything below. Okay, so basic layers. If I move this semi-transparent card to the bottom of the stack, then I have full yellow. This is completely obstructed. All right, so that's a really basic primer on layers. What's really, really important here is understanding that with the way iRacing spec maps work, is that you'll have sort of two types of layers. I want you to think about it. You'll have the layers within your file, within your Gimp file. But then you'll also have two Gimp files, one of which is layered on top of the other. Don't worry, we'll get there. I'm going to download a template from iRacing and show you how to set up, as a quick refresher, painting a car in iRacing. There's a couple of preparational steps that are always good to go ahead and knock out. So the car I'm going to do for today, just because it has a really easy template, is the Audi RS3 LMS. Fun little car to drive if you haven't driven it. And it's worth pointing out real quickly a couple of things you still have to do kind of in the sim. Your wheel colors are not on the template. Okay, your numbers, you still have to style those if you're using the iRacing numbers. There's a whole separate conversation out there about custom numbers. But if you're using the iRacing numbers, you still have to manipulate them right here within iRacing. But you will be able to do some cool stuff. For the purposes of today, I'm just going to leave this how it is right now, and I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to download the template. So Chrome opens. Yes, I was watching a JRT thing. I'm trying to get my streaming stuff set up again. And now I've got downloaded here, I've got the new Audi RS3 LMS template in a Photoshop file. It's actually a PSD file right now. And I'm going to browse out to my working folder where I keep all of my my car paints. Audi R8. Oh, there it is. RS3. And I am going to select that, extract it, and I'm going to replace the one that's there because the one that's there is the old one that doesn't have the spec maps. quick aside there. If you have an old template on your computer from a car, it doesn't have the spec maps if you haven't downloaded it after the beginning of December 2019. So I am now going to open up this PSD file in Gimp. So let me get Gimp open. And I went ahead and I recommend always regularly going to Gimp's website and downloading and installing the newest version. So I'm just going to drag the new template in, and it's going to ask me a question here if I want to convert it from PSD, and yes I do. And now I've got a Gimp file. So let's do a little bit of quick setup. First thing I'm going to do is save as an XCF file, right? I want a native Gimp file that I can work with going forward. If I don't do this and I do a bunch of work and I export my target files and all that stuff, and then my computer crashes or I have a power outage, I've lost all the work, right? I can't revisit it. It's important that you start by saving your RSF. Excuse me, your XCF. All right, so I'm going to save that. And then I'm going to go ahead and set up iRacing. So I'm going to take my Audi here, and I'm going to go racing. I'm going to test drive. I'm going to change my car here to the LMS. I always do my painting at the centripetal circuit at high noon without any kind of clouds or, I want the clearest light possible. So I'm going to continue. Now I have an Oculus Rift, so it is going to prompt me in a second to ask me if I want to open it in VR or not, and I do not, so I'm just going to say no, take a sip of my coffee, and we'll wait just a second while that loads. Okay, now once you're in the centripetal circuit, first thing you do is go ahead and click test and get in the car, right? And let it run for a second. And then I want to go back real quickly while that's just sitting there running, and I want to show you something. If you go to your documents, iRacing, paint, and then the car you care about right now, right? Notice every folder has a car. You'll notice that the folder's empty, right? There's nothing there right now. If I were to go join a race session, this folder would get populated by .tga files, targa files of every driver there, right? Their paints are downloaded onto this computer. This is the folder that your computer uses to render. And so what I'm going to do here is I am going to export from Gimp my targa file. And it's an important foundational step here. Trading paints needs to be off, right? Do not have trading paints on during this, or it'll keep trying to download whatever paint you've assigned to this car. It'll keep overwriting your work, and it's frustrating. So don't do that. So let's real quickly go export from Gimp into that folder. Now, to do that, what I need to do is take the work that I've done so far, which is nothing, right? Right now, I'm going to have a fully solid blue car, which is fine, especially if you're Tanner McCullough. That's totally fine. You're gonna export this file into a targa format. So I'm gonna go File, Export As, and I'm gonna find that folder, Documents, iRacing, Paint, RS3LMS, and I'm gonna call this file car_147818.tga. Now, that number is because that's my iRacing ID. How do you find yours? In iRacing, click your little helmet, go to View Profile, and there it is. Every driver and every team have their own ID. So now I'm going to export this, and if I go back and I exit my car, notice how that's the base default iRacing version, right? That's not my blue. I want my blue. Now, I want to point out real quickly, notice my driver right now is in the car. If I go forward in time to live, my driver's not in the car. So I'm going to hit refresh here, and nothing's going to happen. It's just going to sit there white. The paint is tied to the driver. And so the driver has to be in the car for the paint to refresh. Next time you're in a practice session, notice that there might be a car that's been sitting on pit road for a while after you joined, right? You joined and they were just sitting there, and their car's solid white. Until the driver gets in the car, it's not going to update. So I'm going to back up my replay here until my driver gets in, and then you'll see as soon as he gets in, this car will refresh. Okay. And now I'm just going to pause it. I have my tools open, and that's, I believe it's Control F12 as a default key binding. And I'm just going to have this available for me to zoom in, zoom out, and you know, look at what I'm doing. And if I were doing a full car paint, I mean, I'm going to be in here for a couple of hours, and I'm going to be zooming in, looking at really close details and all that stuff, and making sure my alignment's good. For today's purposes, what I want to do, I think, is I want to do a car that's one primary color. That we can leave it with this blue if we want, but one primary color that has a matte black hood, but a chrome stripe in it, right? A car that is some color with a matte black hood and a chrome stripe. Okay, so let's say for a moment that spec map layers didn't exist. How would I create that sort of scenario, right? Or something as close to that as I could. Let's back up in time here to a day before these new capabilities existed. So what I would do is I'd go turn on my wire and I would paint my car. So what I just described was pretty simple, right? I want a black hood, and I'm going to be really rough here, guys. So I'm not going to be nearly as exact as I typically am when I'm doing a paint. I'm just going to be rough. Oh, in fact, that can go around there because that's part of the hood. The bonnet, as they say. So I'm just going to go around here and very roughly outline the hood. Okay, so now I have a rough outline of the hood as a selection. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call that black hood. And let's think back to our PowerPoint example. I've got a base layer and I've got a black hood layer. And so if I take my paintbrush here, go big, and paint, I'm painting within that selection, but only on this layer. And so if I turn that layer off, I've still got the blue underneath, just like in PowerPoint, how I still had that yellow base underneath, right? In fact, for consistency's sake, why don't we say that this is a yellow car? So I'm going to turn off my selection. I'm going to paint the base yellow. Okay, so now if I go back to iRacing, I'm going to turn my wire off. If I go back to iRacing, I should have a yellow car with a black hood, right? Let's find out. No, I don't. Now, why don't I? Think about that for a second. I know the answer. It's because I didn't export again to that target file. So now you'll notice when I go back up here, it remembers which file I exported to, which is great. I can just hit Control E again, and that'll export. I'm going to go ahead and export it to that file again, and then go back to iRacing and refresh it. And cool, I've got it. Now, I need to also get this area in black, and so we'll take just a quick second and do that. Grab my black again, and we'll go back to our black hood, and let's just paint this up real fast. And I think that's all that is needed to get the hood fully black. There we go. All right, I know that there's this little yellow here. We're going to ignore that for now. It's fine. Okay, so I've got a yellow car with a black bonnet, black hood. Now, I want a sweet freaking racing stripe. So I'm going to turn my wire back on, and I'm going to draw a sweet freaking racing stripe. So again, I'm going to go down here to my layers first, and I'm going to create a new layer. Sweet freaking racing stripe. And I'm just going to draw that stripe to here for now, because I'm not sure. I think there's a scale. You know, we'll go ahead and just go all the way back, and we'll find out if there's a scaling difference or not. I've got to be careful while doing this to not care about being precise, but I'm a bit anal retentive, and I'm afraid that that's going to be tough for me. Okay, so I have made a selection within a new layer, which is on top of the hood, right? So there's the base layer of the car. On top of that, there's a layer of black paint. And on top of that, there's going to be a layer of white paint. Right on? So let's turn our wire back off again and export it one more time. This is like the roughest painting tutorial ever right here. But now you can see we've got a white racing stripe on a black hood on a yellow car. Cool? So that's basic painting. Now, extrapolate. Let's say that you spent the last 2 hours meticulously crafting the 36 layers that it takes to make your really awesome car. That's awesome. That's where I'm imagining we're at right now. And so now I want to start putting into effect some of iRacing's new Spec Map stuff. To that end, let's do a little bit of training on extremes. So I'm going to turn off my black hood and my racing stripe for the moment, and I'm going to color this car white in its entirety. Turn off the layer. Now I'll color the car white. Okay, let's go back and look at it. So now I've got a solid white car. Okay. I mentioned earlier, while we were in PowerPoint, that there are multiple sort of levels of layers of layers here. Thus far, we have created one file. Where's my documents file? We exported and created in that iRacing Paint Audi file, the TGA file, right? This target file. That's my paint job. What we need to do now is create another one from this same Gimp file. Create another one, which is the metallic layer that will sit on top of this. And so the important thing here is that the design of the car is defined by this one. The reflectiveness of it, or the matteness of it, the roughness or smoothness of it, are determined by the next file we're going to create called a Spec Map. Okay, so let me show you how that works. And we're going to go through a couple of extremes here just so you can understand the how and the why. Again, I want this video to be foundational and instructive, not as to why things work, not just that they work. Okay, so back in Gimp, I am now going to turn off all of those working layers, and I'm going to turn on the new custom Spec Map layer group. This is actually a group. And you notice you've got several sections below. Now, I'm not going to pretend to have a full granular understanding about how all this works. I'm still in a bit of an experimentation phase myself. But what I do know for sure is that your red controls how metallic something is or isn't, and your green is how abrasive it is. So take a moment and think about this for a second. If I take a piece of sandpaper, right, heavy, harsh grit sandpaper, and then spray paint it with chrome silver paint, then I've got a really rough, really reflective surface, right? Think about that image for just a moment, that activity for just a moment in your head. Now, because we're working with pixels and not with physical materials, everything's ones and zeros, right? Everything's values. And so for a minute here, we're going to talk about colors, but they aren't colors, they're values. So I'm going to go, remember we've got an all white car right now. I'm going to go into my metallic base paint, and I'm going to open up which color I'm painting it. And by color, I want you to start, when we're talking about spec maps, I want you to start substituting in material. How metallic is this? Not how white or yellow or green or blue this is. Okay? Now for the metallic layer, what we want to do is always make sure we're on the scale of 0 to 255. That gives us more granular control by 2.5 than 0 to 100, right? You've got 255 increments to select from here. And you can see right now that we've got white selected, full white. But what I want to turn off, I want to turn off all my green and all my blue. Okay? But I'm going to have 255 total on the top. And so what I'm seeing is red, but what I'm really saying is all the metal all day long. Okay? So I'm going to hit OK, grab my paint bucket, and I'm just going to grossly and roughly paint this entire layer in that red. Which, what I mean to say is, I'm going to make this entire layer fully metallic. Okay? So, I'm now going to go up and I'm going to export this file as a car spec and then my number into that same folder. So I mentioned earlier that the layers are in the files too, right? So what we have here, and unfortunately the way Windows does this, here we go, this will make more sense. Much like how we had a keyboard with a newspaper on top of it, or a newspaper but I've got sunglasses on, right? Here we have the car's paint and then its metallic properties on top of it, right? Layered on top of the other file. These two files work in tandem to make one image. They work together, but they are two files. And this is the tricky part that I think was sort of missed. One of the tricky parts that I think was sort of missed in Drew's otherwise pretty good tutorial was this foundational understanding that there are two files working together on one single car. Okay, so what have I done? I've painted a car white, right? That's what this file is doing. I've painted a car white, and then I've said that white is as metal as it can get, as reflective as it can get. Well, what is the absence of color at its most reflective? Well, it's a mirror, right? So what should I expect now if I go back and refresh this car? I've gone to an extreme. No color, fully reflective. I've got a chrome car. Pretty slick, yeah? All right, so I've got a chrome car. Let's keep playing with the extremes. What happens if I go into that same metallic layer and I say, all right, well, if that's what fully metallic is, what is a zero? And notice how the current color changed to black. But remember, we're not talking about color. We're talking about how metallic it is. And so now I've got a white car whose surface is fully not metallic, whatever that means. And I'm going to re-export my spec map. So I haven't changed my car's color. The car is still white. I've only changed the spec layer. So what that's basically doing is nullifying that layer. I have a zero property of metallic overlay. So whatever iRacing's default metallicness is what I am being presented here. Looks like a regular car. Make sense? If I want something in between, easy peasy. I simply go here and I say, I don't know, 125. And notice now how I've got this sort of crimson red. I'm going to paint the layer that color, export my spec map. And now I've got a white car that's quite reflective, more reflective than the regular, but not crazy reflective. Now, what happens if I go paint the actual car? So I'm gonna collapse this group. I'm gonna turn off my custom spec map. I'm gonna turn on my car stuff again and go to my base. And I'm gonna paint the car a bright, bright red. Now remember, we're not looking at the spec map now. Now we're looking at the actual colors. So no longer are we talking about roughness. Now we're talking about redness, okay? If I paint this car red in color and then export it, and this is one area you have to be careful. Right now it's wanting to export to the spec map. I want to export back to the car itself. And then go back to iRacing. Now, I haven't changed the spec map. It's still semi-reflective. But now I've changed the color of the car from white to red. So I'm gonna hit refresh. And now I've got a semi-reflective red car. What if I want a crazy, chrome wrap in red car? What I'm gonna do is leave my base layer as red in color, and then I'm gonna go say, okay, fully metallic, but red. So I've already got the but red part done because that's what color the car is. So now let's make it fully metallic. Bucket tool. Oh no. Okay, so I just made the stupid mistake I just cautioned you against. I just exported to the car instead of to the spec map. This is an easy mistake to make, and you'll make it a couple of times. Kind of glad it happened, because now I get to show you how to fix it if it happens to you. So I'll export it as the spec map, but now what I've got is basically two identical TGA files out there, both of which were created from the spec map. So I'm just going to hide the spec map layer again, turn on the cars layer, export as to the car again, and now I've fixed my mistake. Easy to make that mistake, especially if you've been painting for as long as I have. You're so used to hitting Control E. Okay, so I've now got a red car with a fully metallic spec map. Refresh. Check that bad boy out. Kind of cool. So let's look at this for a second. This is covering the entire car. There are a few parts that are above it. Think about the orientation of the layers in relation to one another, right? The parts are above the base paint, but the base paint itself is covering the whole car. So if we go back here and look, you'll notice that everything has that reflective wrap on it, right? Everything except for like the grille and the lights have this reflective surface, which is kind of nifty, but not always what you want. Because if you put something in your paint that's below that, then it will be covered by reflection. So its colors, its reflectivity might be distorted in a way that you don't want. So that's where carving things out, creating negative spaces is going to become important. If we think back to our PowerPoint example, that's not a diamond, right? It's a negative space in a blue overlay. A negative space in a blue overlay. And so what I want to do here is create a negative space to allow my hood to appear but not fully reflective. Okay, so let's get back to our mission of creating a yellow car with a black hood and a chrome stripe, right? That's what we said we wanted to do when we embarked on this. So I'm going to go back into the car again and notice that I've got my spec layer turned off, right? That's off. And I'm working on my car right now. Let's paint it yellow. Whole car is yellow, right? It's yellow, fully reflective, which means gold. Kind of neat, if you ask me. So you'll know we'll make a gold car with a black hood and a chrome racing stripe. It's going to be an ugly car at the end of the day, but we're having fun. All right, I'm going to turn on the hood and think about what's going to happen for a second. Take a moment and actually think about that. What's going to happen when I take this black hood and I export it onto this car, right? We've got a gold car. What do you think is going to happen to that hood? Got it in your mind? Okay. Did what you thought would happen? So what actually happened was the hood turned black and it adopted the same layer of reflectivity as the rest of the car. That is the maximal color, black. At the maximal reflectivity, we have black chrome. Okay? Because remember, the spec map sits on top of the car. The map is on top of the car. Okay? And I know you just saw an MIP file and you probably saw that somewhere else and are like, oh my God, Ben, what is the MIP file? I'm going to get to that in just a little bit, but I'll explain it to you. So we've now got a yellow fully reflective, meaning gold, car, and then a black fully reflective hood. So let's now add in our white racing stripe. And again, as I export this, think in your head what you expect to happen. We'll have a white stripe on a black hood on a yellow car, but with an overlaying instruction to be fully reflective. That fully reflective is on top of everything else, right? We've got a chrome stripe because white, at its most reflective, is a mirror. The absence of color value at its most reflective is a mirror. It's chrome. All right. Now, when we first started, though, I said I wanted a matte hood. Well, I don't have a matte hood right now, do I? What I've got is a reflective hood. So think back real quickly to PowerPoint, right? We talked about our layers over here. And remember that we don't really have a diamond. Nowhere did I draw a diamond. What I drew was lots of other shapes to make a negative space that had the approximate shape of a diamond. The negative space is diamond in shape, but there's no diamond that's been drawn. And so what I need to do is create a negative space in the reflectivity in the spec map. Right now, I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to turn off the car and I'm going to go back to the spec map area. When we look at reflectivity, how metallic this thing is, nowhere have I given it any sort of exclusions, right? I painted the whole thing fully reflective, fully metallic. So what I want to do now is get my hood shape carved out of the reflectivity, carved out of the metallic layer. So let's do that. I'm going to go down here. I'm going to go to my black hood. And I'm going to turn this back on for a moment so you can see what we're doing. I'm going to go to my black hood. I've got that layer selected. And I am just going to select the shape that I drew out earlier, right? So just a quick selection of that whole shape. And then I'm going to turn that back off. I'm going to go up here. And now I've got an outline of my hood on the spec map. Okay? So within this layer, I am going to erase my instruction of being fully metallic. I have created a negative space within the metallic layer. So I'm going to go export that to my spec map. Now think about it for a second. What do you think is going to happen? All right. Do you see what's happened? What color is that racing stripe? It's not chrome anymore, is it? Now I said I wanted a chrome racing stripe earlier. So I'm going to get to that in just a moment, but I want you to notice, take a moment and notice that A, I don't have a matte hood. I wanted a matte hood. I've still got reflection here. So what happened? Well, remember when we were messing around with the extremes of the white, right? The extremes of metallic versus non-metallic. When I set metallic to 0, what happened was I got the original iRacing layer of gloss, of reflectivity. And so that's what we have here. This area here has 0 spec map applied to it from the perspective of metallicism, right? It's got a negative space there. And so I'm instructing it to do nothing special to that area. And that's really, really important. If you've got a logo, like let's go back and look at the car real quickly. If you've got a logo, like let's look at this TCR sticker, right? That TCR sticker has got our gold chrome wrap over it. And so if I wanted to make that TCR sticker stand out more, right now it's sort of muted a little bit by the gold wrap. I would find it back on my paint file, right? Get its shape in a selection and then make a negative space within the metallic layer. Why don't we do it real quickly just to illustrate. So let's find, there's the TCR sticker we were just talking about. I'm gonna go select none, right? Because I don't need that one. And I'm just gonna roughly carve out this little guy. Okay. And then I'm gonna go back here again. Now that selection stays, right? And so I'm going to go in and I'm just going to remove that. So now I've got a negative space where that sticker will be. Okay? So that means I'm saying, iRacing, please don't add any extra reflectivity. Don't make this any more metallic and reflective than it is by default. Did I export that? There we go. Now I have. And refresh. And now my sticker looks like it's on top of the chrome wrap instead of behind it. Cool? Now, you might be wondering, why am I seeing black here in these negative spaces? Okay, I'm glad you asked. Thanks for asking. You're a great student. There's another level to all of this fun stuff. Now, I mentioned a minute ago when we were looking at the hood that we now, instead of matte, we now had the standard iRacing level of metallicness and reflectivity on the hood, but I wanted a matte hood. So what I'm going to do real quickly is talk about roughness in exactly the same way that we're not talking about red, we're not talking about yellow, we're not talking about green. The red channel metallic is a value of how metallic something is, not how red it is. In the same way, we're not talking about colors when we're talking about roughness. We're talking about sandpaper grit. We're talking about how rough something is. So think about that for just a moment and let's experiment. And in the same way, we're going to do it with a couple of extremes. Now, right now, yellow as a color is selected, but remember, not colors, values. We're going to go to 255 to give ourselves the most granular control. But this time, we're going to zero out the red, and we're going to work in the green layer. The green is roughness, and if you forget that, it's in the title. So the green is roughness. So right now, 255, green, and I'm going to paint this whole layer in green. Now, notice how, hold on, I thought you just painted the whole layer. Well, yeah, but this one's on top of it. If I turn this layer off, right, if I hide it, you can see that I really painted the whole layer. But because of the negative spaces that I've already made, I can see green under the red. What I really can see is roughness under the smoothness. There's an area of that sandpaper that I did not spray paint. I can see the roughness under the smoothness in the negative spaces. So let's export this to our spec map and see what we see. The car in its main body is fully reflective because I've got the maximum value of reflectivity. And I've got the least possible value, meaning 0 of reflectivity on the whole hood area, the black and the white. And now I've also said, let's make it rough. So what do we got? We have a black hole of reflectivity. 0 reflectivity on the hood. Why? Because I set roughness to max. Roughness is as rough as it can get. Let's go back to our extremes. If I go 0 and paint my roughness layer with a 0, export back to the spec map, then we're back where we started, right? Let's find the right matteness for the hood. Remember, our end goal though is to have a chrome stripe. So think about that for a minute. How are you going to solve that problem based on what you've learned so far? I'm going to make the hood, I don't know, probably about a 190 on the matte scale, right? 190 out of 255. So whatever that is. And you can just sort of experiment until you find what you like. That's not terrible. I'm going to go a little higher. 220. Ooh, too far. I think I forgot to export at that last increment. Let's go back to 190 again. It's so easy to forget to export it once you've made the change. Ooh, we're getting close. That's kind of cool. But I'm going to go a little more reflective. We'll go to 170. Little less matte. Nice. Okay. So I think that's pretty dope. Now, I don't want the racing stripe to be matte though. I want the racing stripe to be chrome. So have you been thinking about how to solve that? Let's show you the solution. So just like I created a negative space in the hood's area for the hood at large, now I want to create a new reflective positive space, new instructions on reflectivity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up here and I'm going to create a new layer called Chrome Racing Stripe Spec, right? Something like that. Be descriptive with layer names in general, guys. That's a good overarching bit of advice, I would say. And then kind of like earlier with the hood, I'm going to go down here to my sweet freaking racing stripe layer, and I am going to select it. Okay, so I have now selected that layer's shape. And then I'm going to go back up here into my new layer, and I am going to paint that bad boy 255-0-0, meaning fully red, which really means what, everybody? Say it together, fully metallic. So let's think for just a moment about what we've done. And again, let's go back to this idea, right? We have layers under other layers, under other layers, under other layers, under other layers. We've got multiple layers that are working together to create this very specific sort of muted shade of yellow diamond. So what do we got going on here? We have a yellow car with a black hood and a sweet freaking racing stripe that is white. We're telling the car to be matte, but on top of that matte, I want maximal reflectivity everywhere except the hood. But on top of that, I want a big chrome sticker, right? You're working from the bottom to the top. Bottom to the top. Read it like a paragraph, read it like a sentence, and tell the story layer by layer, and that'll start to make sense. So let's export to our spec map again with this red on top of the negative space, on top of the matte, on top of the paint. And drop the mic. You now have a fully reflective gold car with a matte black hood and a chrome stripe. Okay, so like I promised, I was going to get back to how the files layer on top of one another and what the hell is this MIP file. I hope I've made it pretty clear that the design of the car is your car underscore your number. The metallic and roughness, the spec map of the car, lays on top of that with the car spec and then your number file, right? Those two files exist on your computer. The MIP file is basically an optimized version of the spec map. So look at the sizes here. Let me expand this window. Notice how my spec map as a Gimp file that I'm exporting is 251K, whereas the MIP file is 51K. Now, nowhere in all the work that I was doing did I create this MIP file, and that's important. So it's important to know that iRacing makes this. You don't have to. Whenever you're in the sim and you're using a spec map, the MIP file creates itself. And then when you go to Trading Paints, so I'll go there real quickly myself. And you open up the car that you want to update, and I'll just go to the teams here. If I go to my car and I choose my team paint, I'm going to upload the paint that I made, right? And just like always, that means I'm actually going to my documents, iRacing, paint, my, what was I painting? The LMS, and I'm grabbing my car file, not my spec file, and I'm hitting open. Fair enough? Now on that same car, first off, I should point out, I'm a Trading Paints Pro member. It's my understanding that originally they only made this available to Pro members, but I heard someone say, I don't know if it's true or not, I heard someone say that non-Pro Trading Paints members can now do this as well. But anyway, so once you've uploaded your actual car's TGA file, now you go down and you add a spec map to that same paint. And notice how it's saying now select an MIP file. And so when you go back in there, you should see the iRacing created MIP file in that same folder. You hit open, you hit OK, and now both of them are there. My yellow car with a black hood and a white racing stripe, which, because I put that spec map on, is really a gold car with a matte black hood and a chrome stripe. That has created what will, whenever I enter a session with everybody else, if they're running Trading Paints, they'll see that gold car. So that should be it. Guys, I cannot wait to see what the community creates with this. I enjoy painting cars. I'm not a graphic designer. I'm such a rookie. I obviously don't own Photoshop, or I'd be using the better tool. I know Gimp is nowhere near as good a tool. I've heard about Krita in response to all this for the first time, and apparently some people love it. Maybe I'll take a gander at it. But I've been really happy with Gimp for a long time, and I was glad to have a little bit of time to tinker with this. I hope that you have found this valuable, not in only how to do this stuff, but why it works, and some of the underlying theory that hopefully will make you even more enabled to create some awesome designs. I want to see really cool stuff on track. So hopefully you enjoyed this. I think it went a little longer than what I wanted, and I didn't realize how much time I would spend in PowerPoint at the beginning with really foundational stuff, but I hope it all came together in the end and helped a couple of light bulbs turn on so that everyone can start creating some cool stuff. So thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you. If you have any requests, let me know. I'm thinking about doing another painting tutorial soon. So if there's a particular car you'd like to see painted, or anything particular you want to learn, let me know. I enjoy doing this kind of thing. So thanks again. We'll talk to you soon. Take it easy.